Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name's Murray Duckworth, and it's my great honour this morning to introduce our session 2 called Trouble in the Water. And when Jason brings up his image in a moment, which I think is a wonderful image of the menace at home and today's topic, you'll notice that featuring quite prominently is the threat from the ocean and the water. It is my pleasure to welcome and introduce David Green here today. His topic will be Hitler's Penguin Parade. In your program you'll see a bio of David. I won't regurgitate that, just to say that David has written a number of books, and whilst the bio says that he's undertaken his PhD, I understand from David that he's just started the PhD, which is great, from the Australian Defence Force Academy, and his topic is Dunster Force. So if we have any experts on Dunster Force in the audience, I'm sure David would appreciate some advice in getting on with his PhD. David's presentation this morning is, as we said, on Hitler's Penguin Parade. Ladies and gents, please welcome David. Thank you.
Thank you, Murray. Thank you. And good morning, everybody. Thank you, Jason, for the invite to talk today. Clicker. So when I came to preparing this talk, I thought about a more recent menace we've faced on the sea, and we have to thank our pilots from Virgin for being our early warning defence. So thank you, David. But I'd like to concentrate today on the German Navy in Australian waters during the Second World War. I know Tom will be speaking about Japanese submarines, and we'll be learning more from Jason, I believe. But one thing which always struck me was the fact that there was an Australian submarine also, let me say it again, a German submarine in Australian waters, the U-862. And we see it here in Penang Harbour, Malaya, in 1944. And this particular submarine actually, we can see it here navigating south of Tasmania and off the Green Cape Gabo Island before it disappeared off to New Zealand, like my little laser pointer here. But it's just interesting, the fact that a German U-boat had actually operated in Australian waters during the Second World War. But I digress because so today I'd like to talk about what I'll call Hitler's pirate fleet. And during the Second World War, the Kriegsmarine operated 10 Hilfskreuzer, pardon my German, which were auxiliary cruisers ranging from, say, 4,000 to 9,400 gross registered tons. And these raiders, if you like, were supplied with seaplanes, hidden guns, 15-centimetre guns, sometimes small armaments hidden underneath fake deck houses and so forth, torpedoes, and on some occasions mines. And the sailors, after a successful cruise, are awarded this particular badge, it's the auxiliary cruiser's badge. And this is how they saw themselves, as Vikings on a long ship, sailing forth from the northern waters. So each raider carried carpenters and so forth, tons of structural materials. And what they could do was paint and change the appearance of the ship. A new funnel could be added, the superstructure could be changed and so forth. The ship could be painted another colour, different flags and so forth. And rangefinders for the armaments were carefully concealed within the ship. And on the side of the ship there were steel plates which could be raised and to reveal the armaments. The decks were specially strengthened to hold the guns, and these guns could rapidly swing into action against an unsuspecting foe. And then closing on the prey, at the last minute the swastika will be raised or flown, and distress signals will be jammed. And David before spoke about Nauru and the comet in the Orion. This is Comet, disguised as a Japanese merchantman off the island of Nauru. And I think Nauru is interesting because it's the only place I can think of that both the Germans and the Japanese attacked during the Second World War. It's really quite remarkable. But we see this here as a Japanese merchantman, much to the, I don't know, the Japanese government was not very happy at the time when they heard about this, but it was always an uneasy alliance. And most people in this room are probably more familiar with the raider Cormoran, and we all know that Cormoran was responsible for sinking Sydney off the West Australian coast on the 19th of November 1941. Cormoran was later scuttled with 318 of the crew rescued, and these crew, most of them spent their time in Tatura, which I think we'll hear about later on today as well, which is interesting. But what I'd like to do is mainly talk about the cruiser Pinguin. And this, the Pinguin started off as a motor vessel, Cardenfels, built in 1937. After the outbreak of war, it was requisitioned by the German Navy and turned into an auxiliary cruiser. And it was displacing nearly 8,000 tons. It was 155 metres long. It had a speed of 17 knots. And so over a period of 6 months, this merchant ship was converted into a warship with 6 15-centimetre guns, one 7.5 centimetre gun, a twin 3.7 centimetre gun, 4 20mm anti-aircraft guns, 2 torpedo tubes, 300 mines, and it was also equipped with 2 float planes. So it's really quite a formidable warship, but to all intents and purposes, an innocent merchantman. And under Captain Xerxes Ernst Felix Kruger, Pinguin sailed from Germany on the 15th of June 1940, bound for the Indian and Southern Oceans. And it left Europe and sailed north. Around this point here, it adopted the guise of a Soviet ship, complete with hammer and sickle on the side. And then it sailed south, and around here took on the guise of a Greek merchantman. But our story in the Australian waters pretty much begins around the 7th of October 1940. But I'll just jump ahead 3 days, and here's a photo of Penguin, and disguised as the Greek freighter Kassos at sea. And it's seen here with a rendezvous with the German U-boat UA off the Cape Verde Islands. Three days earlier, back on the 7th of October, the Norwegian ship Storstad was captured off Christmas Island while en route to Melbourne. Storstad was a tanker, and so it was decided that this ship could be used as an auxiliary mine layer, and so it was pressed into service and christened Passat. So over the course of 2 days, 110 mines were carefully transferred from Penguin onto Passat, and we can see here on one of the small motor launches, the bedding and so forth was just put down for this delicate manoeuvre in transporting these mines. And this took, this is a 24 or 48-hour operation in relatively rough seas, so it was really quite extraordinary that this is accomplished. And then with this, actually let me talk about the German mine. It's an EMC mine. It's about 1.12 meters in diameter. It has 6 what are known as Hertz horns. And each of these horns, in effect, is like a dormant battery. And should one of these horns strike a ship, inside there's a glass vial of acid. And the acid comes in contact with the two lead plates, and in effect generates a voltage of 1.5 volts, which in turn detonates the mine itself. These mines were sort of moored from the floor, from the seabed, I should say, at 100, 200, 300, or 500 meters. And together, Passat, Germany's latest warship, and Penguin would lay 230 of these mines in Australian waters without detection. So between October 28 and the 7th of November, Penguin and Passat set off into Australian waters, and we can see Penguin here sailing south of Tasmania up into just before Lord Howe Island, turning west, mining around Sydney and Newcastle, coming south of mining Hobart, and then rendezvousing over here with Passat, which had laid mines in Bank Strait, both entrances to Bass Strait before returning. The first victim of the minefield was the SS Cambridge, which struck a mine off Wilson's Promontory on the 7th of November 1940. It sunk within 30 minutes. All the crew of 58 were rescued, bar one, and that was a particular seaman who went back to retrieve his Melbourne Cup winnings. So maybe there's a model there. Apologies here, this is one of several mines swept off Wilson's Promontory. And the mines, if they were drifting like this, were essentially harmless, and they were usually destroyed by rifle fire. Usually harmless. We'll come to that later in the presentation. The next ship to sink was the US City of Rayville. And the City of Rayville struck a mine at nearly 8 p.m. on the 8th of November 1940 as it sailed into Bass Strait. All 38 crew members were safely in lifeboats, except for James Bryan of Norfolk, Virginia, who re-entered the vessel to retrieve his personal items and subsequently drowned. The ship once again sank within 35 minutes. Bryan was the first US merchant sailor to die during the war, and the City of Rayville was the first US merchant ship sunk in the Second World War. The ship today lies approximately 14 kilometres south of Cape Otway. Deakin University did some work in, I think it was 2008, and, to actually locate the precise location. The freighter Nimbin struck a mine on the 5th of December 1940 while en route from Sydney from Coffs Harbour. And we can only imagine what it would have been like for a small vessel like this to hit one of those mines. Not surprisingly, captain and crew were killed. The British ship Hertford next struck a mine on the 7th of December 1940 in the entrance to Spencer Gulf. It didn't sink, it was towed to Adelaide and then afterwards to Sydney for repairs and put back into service before ultimately being torpedoed by U-571 on the 29th of March 1942 off Halifax, if I recall, Canada. As well as the mines that actually struck the ships, there were some indirect victims of the mining campaign. One of those was HMAS Guringai, which at night time collided with the troop ship Duntroon off Queenscliff with a loss of 24 lives. And this was the first Royal Australian Navy ship to be lost in the war, and today there's a memorial at Queenscliff, which I'm sure Jason's well familiar with. The next night, the SS Arundel ran aground off Barwon Heads, and this was a navigational error through the fear of deviating from a channel that had been swept for mines. And I believe the wreckage of the ship is still visible today at low tide. toll continues with the trawler striking a mine off Broken Bay, New South Wales. Quite incredibly, 5 of the crew survived the incident. Returning to South Australia on the 4th of June 1941, mines continued to wash ashore. This is one particular mine that washed ashore just, I think it was 4 miles away from the town of Robe, and it was successfully, you can see on the far right-hand side the explosive being incinerated. And this mine now resides today as a memorial painted silver in the town of Robe. About a month later, this particular mine washed ashore and was found in Rivoli Bay near the town of Beachport in South Australia. And a RMS, a rendering mine safe team, were called from Adelaide. They arrived to find the mine, and they decided to tow it to another place further away from the town of Beachport. I'm not sure who this person is, but he's standing by a mine which I said usually they're inactive, but on this particular case, this mine was still, to all intents and purposes, armed. And so the mine was taken to a different spot, and we can see here no one seems terribly perturbed by the situation. And in a tragic set of circumstances, a charge was placed at the base of the mine, and they were going to detonate it. And by this stage, the tide was coming in, and there were small waves, and the small waves actually broke contact with the wires leading to the charge. And so, on a second attempt, these 2 sailors went down, and they had a second charge, and they reconnected the wiring. And at this particular point in time, a larger wave came and lifted the mine off the beach onto one of the horns, causing it to explode. And this resulted in the deaths of the two sailors. Those killed were able seaman William Danswan, 23, and able seaman Thomas Dodd. And today, just behind the scene of this accident, there's a memorial. And these 2 unfortunate men were the first casualties of war on Australian soil during the Second World War. On the 18th of July 1941, this mine was washed up near Cape Jaffa, South Australia. And last time I saw it was still parked roadside, painted silver. Mines continued to wash ashore. This one came ashore in 1943 off Port Macdonald in South Australia. Today it resides outside the Customs House, also sitting there painted silver. And for 208 days, Penguin had roamed the sea since leaving Germany. After leaving Australian waters, it sank 4 more ships, and then it sailed to Antarctic waters. And quite extraordinarily, it captured an entire Norwegian whaling fleet of 14 vessels. There was, let me think, 2 factory ships, a tanker, and a fleet of whale chasers. And so these were all sent home as trophy ships, but quite an incredible feat. Penguin, its luck eventually ran out on the 8th of May 1941 when it was sunk by HMS Cornwall. The Penguin was Germany's most successful raider, having sunk or captured 32 vessels in the course of its voyage. But there was a coda, there was a sequel, and this is a black and white photo, but we can only imagine the colour of this particular gentleman's swimwear when this mine washed ashore at Surfers Paradise in 1966. And it was subsequently taken to a safer location. We can see the barnacles encrusting this particular mine. and it was rendered safe. Here we see the two Navy experts and a local policeman beside this mine. So, and that drew to a conclusion of the mines washing ashore in Australia. I know I've read reports of mines washing near Point Lonsdale, near Fraser Island, and so forth. So it was really quite a common occurrence. But the cruise of the Penguin is really quite an extraordinary story, and thank you for your listening. Any questions, or do we wait? Yes, at the back.
You said, I think it was about 200, 208 days that it was at sea.
Yes.
Were they resupplied at all during that period, or were they totally independent from any supply chain from Germany?
It was really quite extraordinary. And what I found fascinating was they would capture ships, plunder them, take on fuel, supplies and so forth, and then often send them back to Germany as prizes. And so we saw that photo where they were actually providing supplies to a U-boat in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. So it was like a two-way street, and if they could, they would capture a ship rather than sinking it, so they could take on food and so forth. Yes?
You indicated that one or more of these raiders went to the Antarctica, and on one of their charts was indicated that Kerguelen, which is an Australian territory,
Yes.
was nominated as part of its course coming into Australian waters and so on. What was the aim of activity in the Antarctic? What was the purpose of the patrol down there, that far south?
So Kerguelen Islands, I believe, one of the most remote island chains in the world, and they actually had a base there. And I think it's under French control now, but there was a German resupply
Fuel?
outpost, if you like, fuel, provisions and so forth. And so quite a few of the raiders actually pulled in, as I understand it, to the Kerguelen Islands, where they could, because it's sheltered, and they could maybe change their guise, take on fuel, and prepare for their next
So was the capture of the 14 Norwegian whaling vessels, was that indirect exposure? In other words, was it part of just going down to Kerguelen, or?
As I understand it, because they had a float plane, and so from the Kerguelen Islands, they had the ability to see over the horizon. And so as they were travelling, and also listening on the radio, they could detect that there was this entire fleet that were there. So they successfully captured it.
Yes. I'm fascinated by the spelling. Can the Germans not spell penguin, or did it mean something else?
Look, that's how Germans spell penguin. And cormorant being the bird with a K. Actually, I came across a photograph when they went into Antarctic waters. They actually took a couple of penguins as pets and kept them in the pool on the deck of this particular warship as mascots, if you like. Yes.
Like the amount of mines that they laid versus the ones that wasn't washed ashore, and where are they now? The leftovers.
Yeah, it's actually quite interesting because there was an arming mechanism. I'm no expert on German sea mines, but whilst they were taught and anchored to the bottom of the sea, they were armed. And there was an arming plate with two settings, an A and an E. And should the mine break free from its mooring, that disarmed it, and it would not explode or exploded on the spot once the tension was released from that particular mine. So a lot of them would have exploded, some washed ashore, others, who knows. Many were swept, and the sailors, like I said, would destroy them with rifle fire.
You mentioned tension actuated. Was it also pressure actuated?
As I understand it, was tension, and those poor sailors at Beachport, there was a spindle, and the spindle was actually poking out of this mine, and one of the sailors said to his superior, maybe I should hammer it in, and for want of a better solution, and he was advised not to. So this particular mine was sort of midway between being unarmed and armed, and hence the the fact that it hadn't exploded and it wasn't rendered defenceless, and so it was just unfortunate. This is a particular mine, and it was resting on the sand, and they judged it to be so soft that it wouldn't have triggered the Hertz horns, if you like.
Yeah.
And it was just unfortunate that that freak wave came and unended the mine, coupled with the fact that the wires had come out on the first attempt. So
that was pressure, actually.
that was one of the horns being broken, if you like,
Okay.
and the contact being made.
Thank you.
So.
Thanks very much,
You're
David.
welcome.
David mentioned that he's not an expert on German sea mines. I reckon he is. That could be a subject for another book, David.
Maybe in the year 2030.
Ladies and gents, please join me in thanking David.